I'm a big fan of check and see rather than wait and see. They don't respond to their name. They're not following directions. They're not really interested in play. The whole world sees everything as like, they're not doing this. They're not doing this. They're not doing this. Like, it's delayed. Red flag, red. But I feel like looking at it the opposite way.
Welcome to
Beyond the Session.
So hi, everyone. My name is Ferdinand Loftus. I'm the founder of Seaport Speech and Feeding and mom to 2 boys. And so welcome to Beyond the Session. Today we have the lovely Kelly Karpus with us. And Kelly, thanks so much for being here. Why don't you give us a little introduction?
Thank you for having me. I think I have been with Seaport Speech and Feeding for almost 3 years. I am a native Michigander. I now live in New York. I did my master's at NYU in speech pathology, and now I work in a school, and I also do some outside sessions for Tony Ann.
Amazing. But so you've been with us for 3 years, but you've been in practice for 8 years. And you focus a lot on early language and late talkers. What drew you to that population?
So I started out my speech career working with adults, and when you're working in the more hospital setting, there is more of a focus on, how can I make sure that post-stroke, post-traumatic brain injury, you're giving someone the tools to live a life with functional language. And in order to do that, after such damage in the brain can occur, the focus is always what can they do and not what can't they do. And so when I transitioned to working with children, I was always just looking at them like everyone is always saying, they can't do this or you're not hearing them speak. But I was always looking at like, yeah, but they gave me a dirty look when I did this, or, when you're looking this way, like, or the way, I think the way like a child makes their way through the world, speech regardless, is just fascinating. And I feel like it's my job with a late talker to kind of put more of the pieces together to build them up to speech instead of just top down versus bottom up. It's just
right.
I always want to look at what can they do and not, start by saying they can't do anything. And that's how I feel about late talkers. I think that it's very easy to say, they're behind, things like that. But I think if we're looking below the surface at all the things that our late talkers are doing, we're always going to be surprised.
Totally. And I also feel like, a lot of times, and the whole world sees everything as like, they're not doing this, they're not doing this, they're not doing this. Like, it's delayed, red flag, red. But I feel like looking at it the opposite way is like really what we should be like doing
and
for
I think
everything in every aspect.
My career in speech got so much easier when I started just meeting a child where they're at. Instead of expecting so much, I always just want to start like where they're at. And I think with a late talker, that's part of just them becoming comfortable with you, them, in relaxing in your session, just being able to really be themselves. It's meeting them where they're at.
So it's like the floor time approach, right? To like life. Development doesn't like skip steps. Everything builds upon everything else.
Right.
If you don't have that like really wide base, then like the whole pyramid's gonna like fall down. And so if you don't have those like really strong structure at the bottom, like that's really hard. What do you wish more parents knew about late talkers before they come to see you?
Just that I like always be looking for things that aren't speech. So are they pointing at something? Are they gesturing at something? Is there a certain part of their day that you notice more activity or less? I feel like this list could go on and on. Like, how are they telling you what they want? How are they telling you what they're not? You don't want. I feel like as adults, we communicate so much through body language and looks, especially in New York City. And just like there's so much nonverbal language we use that I feel like sometimes we aren't giving children just as much credit for all the things they do without speaking.
Totally. And I feel like you go to the doctor's office and they're like, how many words does your kid have? And it like the parents like, I don't know. But we're not really like thinking about like language as a whole.
I know.
And I think the same thing kind of happens in schools too.
And my coworker
like, they're not talking in the classroom.
Yeah. Like we just also, like I think of people in my life who just aren't huge talkers. Like, and that's fine. I know that's not necessarily the same as late talking, but sometimes I think that the expectation that a child will, just immediately or just start using talking all the time. That's not going to be every child in a family, every child in the classroom. I know sorry, Evan, my brother, a man of few words, but his message always gets across and he's very smart. And so I think that, I don't know if that's exactly the right answer to your question, but everyone's an individual.
Right. Everyone's on their own path.
Like,
the path continues throughout the lifespan.
Like kids, they're figuring out who they're going to be. And that's not always going to be someone who runs up to you when you walk in the door. Hi, blah, 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 da, da, da. And I think that that also has bearing on whether or not you're hearing as much from them.
Right. And their temperament can that can really affect how they talk, right? Because I feel like if you come in at the end of the day, 9 people are staring at you and asking you all these very specific questions, and you don't have the motor plan to form the sentence, or you don't have enough ideas behind it, what that must feel like for a 3-year-old.
Right. And just being able to get that out, getting everything in your head out in that time that people want it out.
Right. It happens really quick. So what would you say, how do you tell the difference between just a late bloomer and one who needs support? What do you think, is there any common denominator that you feel you see across typical development?
I feel whenever this question comes up, because I think it's when people find out I am a speech therapist, their first question will be I didn't talk when I was a kid or something like that. And I'll always ask.
Everyone says that.
Yes. I'll always ask are you the youngest? Is there what's your family dynamic like? Because I don't know, my sister talked for everyone in the family, including my parents. So that was everyone has different. It's just I think there's so much behind it. Going back to your original question. Okay. I think I'd also ask, how are they communicating with you at home? Do you feel like they understand you? Do you feel like they can follow your direction? I'd probably try to parse out more about what else is happening. If a parent was saying, they don't respond to their name, they're not following directions, they're not really interested in play, they're not really interested in, I'm not hearing a lot of babbling.
For me.
Yeah, I'm not hearing a lot of
play,
babbling.
If they're not interested or can't do parallel play or only want a parallel play, if their play is super narrowed down,
yeah,
that's when I always feel that might feel different.
Right. And I think if they're not babbling at all, I feel red flags is a bad word, or a bad way to describe it, but just those are indicators that it might not just be a late bloomer to me.
Totally. And I think the standards have changed. I remember when the CDC changed the milestone requirements a couple years back, and there was a huge uproar, and things went more going me nuts. But then I was I read the research behind it, and I was oh, how could they not consult a speech therapist? But they did it. They did conduct a ton of research that was saying these days kids talk a little bit later, and that's okay. But this is just on average. And I again think it's so interesting. I'm very curious. Were those kids all firstborn kids? Were they secondborn kids? Where do they fall in line?
Were
do they have
pandemic
access
kids?
to, oh my goodness. The pandemic kids are so interesting, I find.
Yeah. I think
is that whole generation late boomers? Or what, I had a pandemic baby, lived in a house with a speech therapist, and I see some things and I'm oh, even sometimes in social situations, he'll be I don't know, it's just so interesting. And he goes to an all-boys school, and all the boys in the class, I feel have a very similar temperament and personality. And is it just really well matched, or are they just all COVID babies?
Oh, that's
so
fascinating. Yeah. I'm interested to hear that case study when you publish it when he turns 21.
Well, I think across the lifespan, but I do feel that very crucial time. I mean, we didn't spend a lot of time with grandparents. We didn't spend a lot of time with people.
Right.
We spent a lot of time with books and a lot of time with each other. But he really only had 3 communication partners.
Right. And it's
for the first 18 months of his life.
Right.
And we did FaceTime, but it's not the same. It doesn't activate your brain in the same way. And so, I just find it so fascinating. I don't think there's anything quote unquote wrong, but I just think they had a very different experience, and that birth to 2 is so important, and theirs just look different. And I'm kind of seeing the 2020 and 2021 kids, a big majority of our caseload right now, I would say. A lot of them were late talker-ish, and then now we're seeing them again for social emotional things. And there's been a bunch of kids that have been re-picked up.
interesting.
We're like, great,
Yeah,
you're on.
technique.
Yeah, you're great, you're doing awesome. And then they are now like, having a hard time once they hit
Actually,
kindergarten.
yeah. Yes, we're seeing it.
It's so interesting to see.
It's
And like, I'm happy
wild.
to like help them and shape them. But it is something that like we're kind of seeing across the board. And I don't know that people are still doing like COVID studies. And like maybe it was because they're the coverings of their face and like
Right.
maybe it was the screens with
I don't
the
wanna go down
FaceTimes of seeing family or like
I don't wanna go down that
yeah,
rabbit hole, but I
maybe
do
they
think,
were
like,
exposed to COVID. Who the heck knows? Yeah.
the
You could go down a
emergence
real
of
big
more
rabbit hole.
screens and technology too during that time, I feel like has, like, totally impacted
Right.
even
But
just, like,
yeah.
problem solving, cognition, just so much is different than I feel like the expectation before and after.
How are they doing? They're entering kindergarten. Some of them are entering first grade, and all the red shirt kids are going back to kindergarten. But I find it like just very interesting. And then the academic like challenges that happen around first grade tend to be really hard. So I think, a lot of them are learning to read and write and do math problems. And like those are like, oh, so they were like late talkers, and now they're like kind of going into that early literacy kind of struggles. Interesting.
It's just so layered too, because I think then like that factors in with attention and like how they organize and sequence. It's all layered, like I said.
But I also think like the social emotional stuff, like I was like not in a great state of mind, like personally, giving
I
birth to the
definitely
pandemic.
think that too, but I
And
think
like knowing my husband could be in the room. I just
knowing
feel like
what,
that
sorry.
like totally like affected. No, I just feel like that totally affected how I like raised him in that first year, even though I'm a speech language pathologist and he lived with a speech language pathologist. I do feel like my emotional state was like very different with my first versus my second. And so like I'm
I love
wondering if
that.
like the emotional state of like are the parents in the world like really like shaped their language and like their learning and their attention, their cognition, because I feel like a lot of parents might have been maybe like distracted. So what are some early signs parents could watch for at home? So I think this seems right, but I'm not really sure like what kinds of things. I know we talked about like pointing and gesturing but like what's like your biggest thing? You say like, "Ooh, you should probably give us a call." Like if you had to pick one.
I'd say like a lack of like engagement in play and like a lack of back and forth interaction. I don't want to say eye contact because I think that isn't like a definitive, but I think if you're trying to engage and you aren't getting any reciprocal or, even looking, then I would be looking to getting someone to like take a further look.
Yeah, of course. I'm a big fan of check and see rather than wait and see. I'd so much
Yes.
rather be like,
Yeah.
oh, like that's
I think like
nothing. I'm not worried
yeah.
about that versus saying, you should have come.
I feel like I always hear you say that. I love that because it's not, I oftentimes find when I'm trying to explain like when you Google like tips, speech therapy tips, like just reading about things online isn't going to give you the same information as like being in the room with a professional and your child. And that's not to say like getting them checked out means they're slated for a life of speech therapy, but just I think it's so hard to describe what the tips and give modeling instruction just without meeting someone and having them meet your child.
Totally.
So just I think
I would find too with like the age of like the internet
yeah.
and like AI and like Instagram, what it is. I was just talking about this the other day on my Instagram stories. I started getting it on to like a kick. And somebody had said to me like, "What do you think about Taylor Swift and MSG?" And I was like, you know what? Wouldn't have been my choice of venue if I was a billionaire. But I'm not going to yuck somebody else's yum. And like, if that's like what she like wanted, then like great. But I feel like, Instagram is like that, right? Everyone expects like this big, beautiful, billion-dollar, gorgeous affair. But like, it's not necessarily like what is like right or wrong for an individual. And so I feel like sometimes you watch these Instagram videos and like, my baby can read at 2.5. And you're like, well, that's like really bad for their brain, actually. Like, don't be never too early to work on phonological skills, but don't teach your child to read before their brain is like ready. And don't forget action words. And so I feel like sometimes the age of the internet, you like go on Instagram and you're like, oh, wow, like that baby's doing something super different than my kid. Like how do you like gauge and this person you've ever met? So I feel like that's a little hard. I also feel like with the age of AI, lots of people go into the AI and they're like what
Chat
should my child be
chat.
doing? And AI is like
Right.
not a person.
Right.
Chat
And like,
GBG, like, is my child doing this?
right. The other thing with that too is I think like every child I've worked with has a different frustration tolerance. So you can be cueing the certain ways you cue one child might not be okay for another child. Some kids need more, some kids need a
Gotcha.
lot less. And I think like it's probably, I don't speak from experience, but for a parent, it's probably so frustrating to be trying to correct your child and them getting frustrated. Like sometimes I think with checking in, it can be a little easier for a third party in the room to be directing and, I'm here to check in, I'm leaving after an hour, things like that, where it's just like there's a little degree of separation, but you're still getting the information you need.
1,000%. I had a mom call me about a month ago and she's like, hey, so this is what's going on, like feeding wise. And it's like really difficult. And they're throwing a lot of the food on the floor and they're gagging on things. And I was like, how old? And she's like, 13 months. And I was like, okay, Mama, this is what you're going to do for the next 3
years.
No. Then I would have been like, I'm coming to your house tomorrow. But I was like, 13 months, give it 3 weeks. And these are the things you're going to try. And I gave her like 3 or 3 days. And I was like, listen, don't leave me hanging. Like, I feel confident that you're not going to need me. But also, like, let me know like where you're at with this. But like, try these 3 things first. And it was like a lot of it, Mom was like, I'm becoming really stressed. And it's like, if you would feel better that someone came to your house and was like, this is pretty typical of development, then I'm happy to come and do that for you. But I feel like this is how development goes, like this.
Especially,
and I feel like a lot of people think it goes like this.
And especially at that age, I remember in one case, like a parent had heard, I think it might have been from someone at school, well, your child's really far behind. And then I asked what the other ages in the classroom were. And it was like, at least 2 months. And I'm like, that's like not like kids change so much week by week that it's not always fair to compare them to other students in the class. And I hate that you're getting this information from someone who like understands the class, but it's just not fair to a kid to be like, you're 6 months and they're 8 months. You're really far behind that.
Well, of course you are, because you like gestational age is like different.
Well, right. Yeah. That was a young age to use.
And like, but it really matters. Max is in like a mixed age Montessori classroom for a while and he was in with 3 to 6 year olds. And like the difference between a 3 and 6 year old is like huge.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so like the expectations like really like change a lot. And so I think like even the factor of like the makeup of that classroom like makes such a huge difference. And that's why we do like a lot of the hearing screenings too, because I'm like, let me come in and like see what the dynamic of the classroom is.
Right.
And so I'll spend a lot of time like observing in the classroom. Well, we'll have graduate students that are pulling kids looking at, like a more standardized test for their like chronological age. But like I want to see what it looks like as a whole. Because some of those 3-year-olds are like on it and like in there and like jumping, especially I feel like little girls are like chatty and like, some of the boys might be like quieter or some of the older kids might be quieter, but that's not necessarily meaning that they are not able to follow like what's going on. So like really watching it makes such a huge difference.
It does. And like that, I always, with all of my friends with children, I feel like I see so many kids every day that, a concern from like one parent, like we just see the whole range. So it can be nice, I think, maybe, back to your question about when to have someone come take a look because they've seen it all and they can kind of say, oh, maybe this is something to be concerned about, or no, I've seen that 15 times in the last week. I keep throwing my brother under the bus, but, my nephew had to get a stitch and the nurse there said, don't worry, this is not like, they were like, oh, he's a monkey jumping on the bed. And the nurse said, yeah, we've seen about 60 monkeys today jumping on the bed. Like, it's so, to you, it's one thing.
So it makes you feel a little better.
To you, it's one thing. It's, we see, this is like our field. We see it all the time. It can be comforting to hear, no, this isn't only something your child does. This is something that's very typical. This is something that, like you said, give it 3 more weeks and see and let me know.
And I was like, just like the kind of tinge of like this kind of like tiny little like twink in like what you're currently doing and like the change of your attitude. We used to see it all the time when I worked in a school. We would talk about one student in terms of like, we'd have a team meeting and talk about a student, then all of a sudden that student would do amazing. And it's like because everybody is like thinking about like how do I push them to the next developmental step, and everybody's kind of like brainstorming together, and then all of a sudden like this kid is getting this like, oh my God, that was amazing. They weren't able to do that before. And I feel like sometimes talking to parents, I'm like, do this one thing, and now they have this confidence to go in and change like their perspective of like, oh, behind this is exactly what you do. And I was like, let them like get messy. And she's like, how messy? And I was like, in their hair like spaghetti. And I was like, if you're worried
I
about it, like
love
put it in a
that.
plastic bag and like get into it to like feel and like have this sensation. And then she like was like, okay, this is really hard, but I'm gonna try it because somebody said I should try it. And then like they probably had like a blast together, and they didn't call back because they are like things had gone really well for them. And so I felt like, okay, great. I have to email my mom now and find out what happened. One of the other things too that I see a lot is like parents are like, I've taken an online course, like red flags for children. And it's like this very cookie cutter, like this is what development looks like. And they're like, the course told me I should spend all day talking to my child. And I'm like, yes. But if you don't save any quiet space, when are they going to talk? And the mom is like, dang.
This is what I
And she was
mean
like, I
by
delayed doing this months because I learned in this course what I was going to do. And I was like, they're great. And I'm not knocking this like really awesome, beautifully packaged course that was probably gave you some great information about development. But those courses are really like structured on like, this is what language development looks like. And so some kids might fall ahead in some areas and behind in some areas. And so it's really difficult to say like every strategy is going to work for every single kid.
Right. And I think that again goes back to why it doesn't like Googling is not like when I try to write out instructions, I'm like, model for your child, but also be quiet a lot of the time. Like it's just such a contradiction if you're not seeing it in real life. Like cueing is hard. It's a skill. And again, like I already said, the frustration levels. And I want to be there to help. I don't want to write. I can't type it out. I was just writing something. I was like, probably do this. Like always correct once a day. No more than once a day.
Right. And they're like, no more than one side. Okay,
Yeah,
so
like,
my date might have done it for today. You're like, I've reached my limit.
I
for the
know.
day.
So
Well, that kind of brings me to something else I want to talk about, which was August is AAC Awareness Month. And one of the biggest questions we kind of get from parents is like kind of about that in terms of like, I would like my child to like use verbal language. What does it look like? Is this replacing talking? Like if I talk less, will the house be more quiet? And like if I use a verbal output, will that then cause them to not be able to talk? So like what would your advice be for like a parent that's like, I would rather them talk verbally?
So I feel like this comes up a lot. And I always like to show, don't tell. I would suggest starting the child with like a very simple board. It doesn't have to be voice output, but just maybe some picture symbols. That would be something I would work on in a session and then leave as homework to like have the child use at home. Because I always want the parent to see the child using it instead of me just saying like, yep, they're going to use it, like to a parent before. I guess I'm answering a further question with this, but I understand the concern about verbal speech, but why wouldn't we give them a support in the meantime? I think there's so many supports like that everyone uses on a day-to-day basis. Are you not going to get your child glasses because you want them to see like without them? Would you not get them a balance bike before they rode a big bike?
Yes.
Like there's so many supports. My old example was training wheels. I don't think those are widely used anymore, but there's so many supports that we use without thinking.
Yeah.
And so
No.
I feel like it's because speech is one of the first things you like see or notice about a person. But why wouldn't we give a support for speech if they aren't speaking verbally yet? Would be my main point. And I also always preface with parents, this is a temporary solution. We'll reevaluate in 2 months, in 3 months. This isn't, they're not beholden to using a communication device forever, but so often when I've gotten a communication device for a child, within a year or two, they're not using it anymore because they are speaking verbally. And it was just that little boost. And I'm not going to say maybe they wouldn't have gotten there on their own, but why would I just let a child sit there and not try to put something, in front of them?
Right. Especially like that. The physical motor plan is like a lot easier to learn than like the oral motor plan. Like speech is the finest motor task. And so like kind of like learning how to like be able to communicate is like such a powerful tool. Like I think that would give kids such a boost of confidence. I think
Right. Well,
everybody could like
uh,
benefit from visuals and like
yeah, we already
AAC and like
do.
I use it all the time in my house.
And I will,
Like some
I
very
want to,
low tech like pictures on your refrigerator that are magnets that are like you could go grab the magnet and tell me what you want. Especially like, kids that are like unintelligible. Bawberry. That's Teddy's a bawberry. I like my bawberry is a strawberry. And like he's like upset, he like really wants them and he asks all the time. But like my mom is like, I don't understand necessarily like what he's asking. But if he could go grab that picture and like show me,
yes. And I
and
think that's
everybody would understand like what he means, and then he could be super successful.
right. And I think just going back to the words you're using, successful, powerful. Sometimes when I'm working with a child with AAC, I feel like it's less about the actual words and more about teaching them that they could select something and get what they wanted. And that's like power in this world. Right. Simply, you could hit a button and someone will understand you. Like it's teaching them like the underlying motivation behind communication. This could work for you in getting you what you want. I will never forget this. Oh,
Right. And then, I'm successful.
this is one of my favorite AAC stories, but I was working with a student with Proloquo and he kept navigating out of the activity we're doing. And I kept going back, finally just let him do it. And he went to Dunkin' Donuts and I had been drinking a huge Dunkin' Donuts. He like found the Dunkin' Donuts symbol and I was like, you were commenting on my choice of beverage. I was rejecting you, ignoring you, but like that's power. You're making a comment. And I felt so bad. But like,
Well, like,
that's
that's
just
what I
wanted to
like
chat
love about
about
our
it.
field. Cause like, but that's so cool that you're able to say
Yeah.
like, from a developmental standpoint, that's huge. You just made a comment. And I feel like, a parent who, hasn't studied development their entire lives would be
Just
like,
took a
wait,
class.
that's important.
Yeah.
Right. That's like, why do they keep doing that? Why do they keep doing that? Like all behavior is communication, right? So
Right.
like the things that we do, we're trying to communicate. Why does someone hit? Because you're too close to them. They want space. And so like,
Right.
everything that people do is to kind of get their intentions across, especially if they're not successful. So like that makes a lot of sense.
Right. I don't so
That's
I
really
think
sweet. They were like, how's your car?
Dunkin' Donut hot or cold, hot or iced. So yeah, I guess to go back to your main question, I understand maybe why that would be nervous, but I would, just like you said, ask them to consider all the forms of AAC already out there in the world. Like look at them when you're ordering off a mediocre Italian menu with pictures of the food. Can't that like it's just things like that. Like there's so many visuals out there to begin with that like view it that way, just as a different form of visual support.
1,000%. We were
That
at the
yeah.
airport this past weekend and something on the menu, and I was like trying to like explain what it was, and I was like, "Come look." It was an iPad like at the airport, and you would just like order, and it like came to the table. But there's like those visual pictures, and you're like, "That's so stinking helpful."
Yeah.
Especially like when you're in a different country, and you're like, "I would like the." And you're like,
This
Google Translate. You're like, what is in this? Like, is it spicy? Like, I
right.
don't know. But if you see that visual picture, you're like, oh, that's a red sauce. Or, oh, that has chicken. Or, I can pick out some of those words and like be able to like communicate. I also think too, like, like using whole body communication. Like, I feel like gestural communication is like not something that people like think about a lot. But I think,
Right.
especially New Yorkers, like, we're always talking with our hands or like pointing and gesturing. And I feel like that's like a huge like part of communication and like saying, show me and like having them bring you to things is like
Yeah, you taught me. I
also
remember
like,
you were telling me you were the first person who was like, tell them show me. And I was like, oh, of course. Show me is so important. And just
show me is the
I
first
think
thing I
this
teach.
I think this is like such a funny, interesting question in this city because when I get on the bus in the morning, I am the only person that will say hi to a driver. When if you're taught something, always say hello. I'm a Midwestern gal. If you walk down the street in Michigan and someone doesn't say hi back, you're like, how dare they? If you walk down the street in my neighborhood and you say hi to
Right.
everyone you see, people are like, that person is clinically not well. Like it's just what this kind of, I think,
Right.
dips into your pragmatics, but like using gestures and knowing when to use certain gestures is also just body language. You can say so much through body language.
Right. And like, especially I'm thinking like, kids that don't have a ton of like verbal output yet could like really have a lot to say with like their facial
Always.
affect and like
Yeah.
they're watching everything we do. And I feel like, another thing too, like when I see a kid that's like severely apraxic or has lots of motor planning, like I almost never start with like verbal output, the motor part of the speech, right? Because you like would work that out in the rest of the body first. And so like pointing, gesturing, and waving is the first thing that I
Yeah.
do. And then all the speech comes because like the motor planning is working itself out the pottery and they're like able to come. And I feel like a lot of late talkers are that motor planning stage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
And
like they have the idea, the ideation is there, but like the muscles aren't moving in a coordinated way to like create that speech. And like every kid goes through this like motor planning, like, I mean, every human really. Like you're not born knowing how to walk and talk and ride a bike. So like everybody's like trying to like learn motor planning and praxis.
mm-hmm.
And so like I feel like every kid's stage is like a little bit a different style.
Right.
Some kids it's their motor planning's a few months. Some kids it's like a couple of years, and that's like totally fine. You never know when it's gonna click. But then all of a sudden, like if we can kind of teach them those like the motor plan to like take out a picture or use their bodies to communicate, like that makes the talking that much easier. And then I feel like those kids learn words way quicker. The ones that
And
like
I
can figure out how to do the praxis first.
Right. And then also just back like to what you were saying, I feel like a lot of gestural communication, teaching that, it's like those are easy wins for a child who may not always be able to get words out. They can like do these things and get if they wave to someone,
Right.
they can get a reaction and like be a part of the world that way. And I think that like in therapy with children is so big is like you should be giving them wins. They should be motivated to like do more because they feel like they're doing well to begin with.
Yeah. So important. What do you think is a common misconception about AAC that you run into a lot?
So this goes two ways. I think the common misconception is that then a child will never speak verbally. And I think another common misconception is that if you download an application, plan it in front of a child, then the child's going to be producing paragraphs, just putting pictures. I've had to have a couple of harder conversations where I said, like, all that this child wants is Doritos. That's the only button they're going to hit at lunch. They're not going to, like, we can use AAC to help someone speak, but it's not going to maybe change like who they are as a person and what they want to say, if that makes sense. Sometimes I have this conversation
Which
when
is
a child's,
beautiful, right?
yeah, yes, but oh, we want
I
him to
think
hit
so.
more
Like
than
we're
one
not trying
symbol.
to like put words in their mouth.
Right. And I
They're gonna
think that
think and talk about what's emotionally meaningful for them.
exactly. So going back to my example, I wanted to work on a farm activity. And this boy just wanted to tell me my Dunkin' Donuts was there. Like, you can't control what they say when it's in front of them. And sometimes that's like, I think that's amazing because everyone's an individual, but sometimes it can be challenging when you're working with an AAC device and someone's not producing full sentences or, it's taking them multiple hits to get to the right symbol, like it's the way they're learning the language and it might not always look like what we think it should look like. But that's the exciting
Totally.
part.
It's like kind of like helping them map it in their brain. Yeah. Yeah. It's like all like there's a rhyme and a reason. I also feel like too, like I don't often make suggestions to families that I have not agonized over. Like personally spent a lot of time thinking like, would
Yeah.
AAC work for that kid? And like,
Yeah.
how am I going to introduce
Oh,
that
I
in a
see
way
what you're
that's
saying,
emotionally
yes.
meaningful? You know what I mean? And so like I've
Yes.
agonized to say like, is this the right choice for this kid? Like I've thought about it. I've like introduced, like picture symbols in a way to help them like, okay, let's trial this and figure it out. And so like I've really like used a lot of my like clinical judgment. And like so like the 20 years I've been doing therapy, I'm like, not every kid is gonna fit into this like specific thing. But like
Right.
if AAC is something like that I'm gonna consider, like I've really thought about like, is Proloquo gonna work out? Like is an iPad great for this kid? Is it low tech,
Right.
high tech? So I like spent a lot of time thinking about it. It's not just something that like kind of pops into my head and then I'm like, oh, let me just like purchase this super expensive device or, use something different. So I've like
Right.
really kind of like thought about it holistically before I've said like, let's try this. The same thing with like when I recommend OT. I almost always recommend OT because I think OTs are great. But
I agree.
when I come and say like your child needs a neuropsych or your child needs this, it's like I've really thought carefully about why I think this. And, neuropsych seems like this super scary like word, but I just want to know what kind of learner your child is. Because like using
Yeah.
verbal language, they're gonna have to editorially memorize that. Maybe they're a visual learner and AAC is going to like boost them sky
Right.
high. And then all of a sudden we're gonna see like so much communication. So like I feel like I've agonized over it. And so like I haven't really like
No,
thought about
completely. I don't want to put more work on any family, but I do want them to understand what the implications are of having an AAC device in the house. Are you going to be bringing it with you when you go to a restaurant, or is it going to sit in the corner and he has speech on Mondays, so then it comes out? Like, this isn't, so I don't take it lightly either at all. And that's why I usually try to start with lower supports and build them up so they understand that this isn't something that, well, it doesn't work. Well, is it because you're only using it for an hour every week?
right. And I also feel like too, like it doesn't have to be intimidating, right? So like we want to start with something that like feels right for the family.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like I don't want to introduce this like giant I have trouble programming stuff sometimes and like I'm like looking at the picture symbols and I'm like I don't like that picture symbol and I'm changing it around. But like
Right.
you're not like I don't expect a parent who is like spent their whole lives in banking or is a scientist or is a chef and like hasn't studied development or doesn't know a lot about computers and expected to kind of like learn this device. And so, I really
Right.
want to take into account all the things that families might value and then are excited about using some sort of device so that
Yeah. And
we're
like,
like
how is,
helping families not like introducing something like more work for them.
right. Yes. And where can we fit it into your life that it makes sense?
Right. Totally. So pragmatic language is also a big part of what you do. Can you explain what that means to parents who are like what is pragmatic? Because I feel like a lot of times people are like, when I say expressive and receptive language, they're like receptive and I'm like comprehension versus verbal output. But I feel like a lot of times we kind of miss that pragmatic section. And I feel like it's a huge part of what language is.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think I want to go back to my example about like just being in New York City. It's reading the room. Do you know not to say hi to every single person you see on the subway? When you go to your favorite coffee shop, can you communicate with a nod, or do you need like just the way you interact with the world based on the knowledge you have of the world? And I think for younger children, this for me is very much through play. Like, how might they play differently with a speech therapist versus mom and dad? And like, there's been a couple instances at school where we've noticed one of like a student trying to wrestle. And when we finally called mom, she was like, he wrestles all the time with dad. He must have thought it was okay. Pragmatic language to me is knowing that you can't wrestle in the middle of your classroom, but you can wrestle in your living room. It's kind of just like using your
Right.
knowledge to know what, I don't want to say what is and isn't appropriate, but just how to navigate the world based on those experiences. Does that
Totally.
make
And I feel
is
like
that a good way to
like
describe it? I'd love your
now more
thoughts.
than ever. No, totally. Because I think, like now more than ever, especially like, again, these pandemic babies, but like what typically happens is like a kid graduates from like speech and is like a late talker and like they're doing great or they've never needed speech. And then they go to kindergarten and kindergarten's hard. Because like
Yes.
preschool was like play-based stuff and people
Mm-hmm.
great. You could choose your toy, you could use your work, you could choose your play partners. And I feel like the structure of kindergarten and first grade really changed because it's a lot less play-based. And so you get much more limited time to play and you're not given things,
Right.
I feel like, as
Yeah.
much in kindergarten and first grade. You're expected to play with other people a lot more than like play with like the toys that are given. And so like the pretend play is like a little bit more imaginative and a little more higher level like cognitive. And so
Yes.
like it's really hard to like take your thoughts and ideas and like read another person's thoughts and ideas and like zap all the brains and be on the same page. So I feel like those first 3 months of kindergarten kids are like, what?
And I feel like another kind of good example is like hearing a child say like, I said I was sorry. Yeah, your speech is saying the word sorry, but you don't seem sorry. You don't act sorry. So I think that like learning the word versus what your action is as well.
Yeah. I feel like that all the time. Like, I'm happy. And you're like, you're crying. Like, I know that you
Every day.
want to be happy. Like, you don't like this feeling. You don't like sitting in this feeling. But, like, that's okay.
Yeah.
I feel like it's really tough. Or like, oh, did that person do that on purpose or on accident? And it's always on purpose. You're like, yeah, like, walking out the playground.
I
My
think that was me
oldest is
till
always
like
like,
age
and I
30
was
though.
feeling
So
what?
sorry. Finish your
What'd you say?
example. I was just making a joke on purpose. I'm like,
Oh, I
yeah, that
was
was me for like 3 years ago.
oh, yeah, I mean, New York City too. You're like, that was but I feel like, he was talking about like, oh, we built a tower at school. Like they have these like blocks outside on his playground. And he was like obsessed with them. And every day he wants to build like some giant structure. I mean, they're gigantic and he wants to build
So
a structure. And inevitably every day the structure would fall down. And he would come home and be like, so and so did it on purpose. And I was like, yeah, I've watched so and so like move. And that is a praxis problem. You know what I mean? Like, he walks into things because he doesn't really know where his body is in space. And
yeah,
so, like,
excellent
I
point.
mean that in the most loving, kind way that, like, that kid is probably an OT and is probably really working on that. And he probably feels
Uh-huh.
terrible that his body is not, like, he doesn't know where he is. And so, like, that, it looks like on purpose, but, like, being able to, like, read that is really
Mhm.
hard in kindergarten. Or,
Yeah,
like,
and
somebody
that's
else that has
something
a very different idea.
and something just like I feel like this should, along with taxes, should be taught in high school, just like the way different people
Yeah.
experience like sensory experiences. There was one student that just I was working with and he just kept standing up in like the middle of our sessions, just standing up. And finally he said, like, it's the only way my body feels good. And it's like, we don't know
Mhm.
all this. It's like everyone is comfortable in different ways in like different positions, standing or sitting. And like, I think, I don't know, I don't even know how this related back to pragmatics, but just like maybe it doesn't look like the way we do it, but that's like how it works for him to
Right.
sit.
No, I think that's huge, and I think that's, like, not to get political, but, like, kinda like the problem with the world today. Like, a lot of people
Yes.
can't take their perspective of other people, and I don't know why,
But there's
but,
so
like, I
many.
feel
Yeah.
like that happens all the time. You walk down the street and you're like, "People are really angry."
Well,
And
I
you're like,
just
"Is
like,
that because, like, you can't see outside yourself? You
yeah,
can't
I
gray
want,
area think?" No, 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 I just kind of feel like, yeah, like, that perspective taking, like, that there's, like, a window where you learn that, and if you don't and I think, like, the world is starting to become a little bit more aware of, like, neurodiversity and, like, this, like, where everybody is, like, on their own different path, and so, like, kind of, like, exposing kids. I love to go to the park and be like, "Oh, that kid's learning in that way." And I had a mom the other day was like, "Wow." And I was like, "Oh, we about to get into a fight?" She's like, "It was so cool how you explained, like, that kid thinks differently than you do." And she's like,
yes.
"I never thought to say that to my
And
kid." And I was like, "Yeah,
yeah,
like, that's just kind of like the dynamic of what we've and, like, I don't have to, like, explain that a kid might have special needs or a kid might be, like, whatever, but,
yeah.
like, that kid's learning and they're learning different than you are." And,
Wow,
like,
I
that's
love
just kind
that.
of the way I've always explained it to Marty. She's like,
And also, just like I try to do this not even beyond my career, but like, what's the comparison for you for like an adult that doesn't want like their child to have AAC? Would you rather send an email than call someone? Like, did you ever think of that? Maybe like, how do you
"Right."
prefer sitting cross-legged in your office chair than let this child stand up when they want to work? Like, one size
Right.
does not fit all, and I just think there's so many like comparisons that can be made with the way we as adults function in the world that like we got to be easier on these kids. It's like, they're
I
just doing
know, I
their
know.
best.
And I also think about, like, our generation, like, I remember, like, being, like, really young, being like, you have to sit your desk, like, all day long, and, like, that was the way it was, and, like, you sat and you learned, and, like, you didn't get up, and, like, you had to ask people to go to the bathroom, and, like,
How you
I
yeah.
hope you
Oh,
can
you
hold it
want a
in
drink
because
of
you know
water?
what I
Good
mean?
luck.
Right, I wasn't allowed a water bottle at school, and, like, now there's, like, a designated, like, water spot with a circle that says
I
Maxwell, and you're
think
like,
about
"Well,
this
dang."
all the
And, like,
time. Just
and so, like,
it's
I think, like, education is, like, changing, but, like, slowly changing. But I feel like that's really great, like, getting all those movement breaks in and being allowed to, like, think Like,
And yeah,
I don't know. I feel like seen and heard, like, kids in our generation were seen and not heard. And I feel like, now kids are seen and heard. But that's just like, it wasn't bad. That was just like how everybody was like raised and thinking. And I think we are starting to thinking about the world a little bit different, which I think is good.
right. And I think like that just like in terms of movement, it's all these things that I feel like are like you said, they see it on the internet or something, but like these things can be so small. I always like to bring Play-Doh into certain sessions because like that's giving them some sort of feeling. And like even one of my students recently just likes to reset the timer. It allows them to get up. It allows them to walk to the timer. It's just it doesn't have to mean you're doing jumping jacks down the hallway. It can just be like the smallest thing.
Right.
You know,
Right. And
I
like
was at
what
a
a sense of like control and power.
yeah. I was at a party recently and I had to take a sensory break and I did. When I went to the quiet bathroom for a moment.
Right. Right.
It's just
1,000%. And I feel like, like I consider myself a typically developing adult. Like I like some sort of routine and control and power in my life.
Need it. Definitely.
Need it. Like I need to have, even if it's 2 sips of coffee in the morning, like that holding of the coffee cup is regulating to me.
Yeah. Oh, see, I just want to make a
And
list
like
of these things.
how we make
Post them on Pinterest. Be like, do you do
right,
these
we
things?
do.
This is the
Right.
this
And
is
so
the
like it's not super weird. Yeah, totally. So I have one last question. And I'm like, every time I like read this in your bio, I'm like, girl, what? You've run the New York City Marathon twice.
I have, but I will say, I think I've hung up my marathon jersey.
How long ago was this?
I ran it 2018 and 2019.
2 years in a row?
2 years in a row, and then I couldn't in 2020, and then I
That's
think I just decided no more. I really do
lost
need to
juice.
get a cooler.
Every November, I'm like, I could do this. Like
You could
nothing
totally do
brings
it.
Manhattan together like the New York City Marathon. I cry every year. I
I
like
do
clapping
too.
on, cheering strangers. I love watching like the TikToks of the people like dancing in the streets in Brooklyn
Yeah,
and like the hilarious signs. And every year I'm like, I could do this. And then I'm like, I couldn't even run a mile.
you could do it. You could definitely do it. That's what I tell everyone. Just need the but
How long did it take you to train?
well, you sign up. This is like you'd sign up for a training program. I don't know, 20 weeks, but I run throughout the year, so it wasn't like starting from square one. I feel so
26
I haven't
miles
talked
sounds like
about this in so long.
it's
But
like amazing because it's like not what the
but
average person could do.
but yeah, no. Obviously, it's like incredible, but it really does like I'm just reading your question again. Things like that is how I like operate of like I can do this. I will run 1 mile a week, then I will run 2. Like it's a building block. You're going to get there eventually. Like it's not like it's just like putting the work in and I feel like just reading your question off the Google Doc. Like I treat children like you treat that. Like I know if I walk in, I'm not getting what my results in the first session. Like it's a long game, but we're doing the same thing. We're building on it. Like if we did 2 things today, we're going to do 3 next time and you'll get there. And like, I'm down to play the long game.
Oh
With
man. I mean,
I think
right. No, like I said, every year I'm like, I'm gonna do it. Next year is the year I'm going to run this marathon. Like, what an amazing
I
feeling.
feel
Maybe
like
the adrenaline, but like that's me. Like I'm always like, the adrenaline will get me to the last, and I'm like, no,
it
you have to like
will. I
train.
feel like you should do it. I tell everyone to do it.
I know, but then you have to qualify, which I think it's like a really incredible like
No,
accomplishment.
you just, yeah. Well, thank you. That's all. So
I mean, so cool.
I like
Well,
always want.
thanks.
I feel like
Thank you so much for
you're welcome. Thanks for having me.